You're listening to Geek Tank Radio on 98.1 The Max. The Geek Patrol is back.
Also, they told me you guys look like dorks.
They look like dorks. Oh, I'm gonna... Oh, boy.
Intellectual debate is what we're all about here, Max. And welcome back to Geek Tank Radio, everybody. I'm Joe Thorderson here with our buddy Max over there behind the glass. The rest of the guys skedaddled out of here. They couldn't handle this. But
they look like dorks.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, but we are really excited about our special guest. We have Patrick Reynolds on the phone, Max. He's a filmmaker, documentarian, and he is, on March 15th, was the release of Hendrie. Hendrie, all about Phil Hendrie, who is a comic legend. Really, I don't know anybody that even holds a candle to him in terms of radio. But Patrick, how you doing today, man?
I am doing fantastic. And yourself?
Oh, great, man. Thanks for jumping in. So you're on the West Coast. You're out in L.A., right?
I'm in Los Angeles, yes.
Well, Patrick, for those, I hate to do this but I'm sure there's people out there maybe that have never heard of Phil Hendrie, even though in my mind he should be in the Hall of Fame for radio under almost just about every category. But basically, he's been he's been on the radio, I want to say he started about 40 or 50 years ago, and he had a really unique show from the 90s up until like the mid, the 2000 teens. The Phil Hendrie Show, and I don't even know how to describe the show other than how would you describe it, Patrick? You were around him a lot, so.
Man, that is still a hard thing to kind of put your finger on. But Phil's show was, I guess the way I would describe it is that Phil Hendrie had a talk radio show that had some of the most outrageous and outlandish guests on his show.
Right.
For instance, he might have somebody like from the Frank Sinatra fan club who would go around tasing anybody at a karaoke bar that would dare to sing My Way. And then you would hear this and you'd think, whoa, man, that's crazy. And then people would call in and they would be very irate about this man, and inevitably the man would get arrested and all this kinds of stuff. And then you find out that that Phil is the guest, and he's playing a joke on part of the audience, and then the rest of the audience is in on the joke, and that's a dynamic that's going on. But more relevantly, I think, is this, that he was, and is actually, incredibly quick-witted, and he's an improvisational genius, I'd say.
Right.
And
oh yeah.
And then the story would just build through the show, and at first you think it's real, and then you realize that it's just brilliant comedy. So I know I went the long way, but that was the only way I feel like it's fair to describe it that way.
Well, here, how's this, Patrick? Because I think you're exactly right on the money. I can just tell you this. This is what I found as a listener. So I just was flipping the channels. I should say so I discovered him in 2002. In 2002, I had 4 kids that were all pretty, at that age where, I hate to say high maintenance, but they're younger kids. These are 5 and 6 and 8-year-old kids. And so whenever I had a break to help me sleep at night, I would just put the radio on and just sort of veg out for a while. And I was flipping the channel, and I don't know why I stopped on this, but he was talking to Bobby Dooley about doing, and Bobby Dooley, and it sounded like he's just a regular old talk radio host interviewing Bobby, saying she was, she's the head of the Western States Homeowners Association, and she was just absolutely vehement that she wanted to do a pre-dawn raid on She wanted the police to do a pre-dawn raid on her neighbor's house because they had a blow-up pool in the front yard. And it was a la Elian Gonzalez, and it was like child abuse and everything. And nobody was laughing. He's like, now, Bobby, such and such. And then people would call in, and they're cussing her out, and they were furious. And I'm like, okay, immediately I knew this was a comedy show. It took me a while before I realized that Phil was doing all the voices, though, because I'm like, okay, how is he talking into the phone so quickly? And how is he doing all these impersonations? And how is it that it almost sounds like he's talking on top of the other voice? It's brilliant. I don't even know, how somebody does that. So
yeah, that's part of, the way the doc works essentially is with the use of chapters. And that is one of the chapters where because everybody says that, and if you describe the show, you don't quite understand it until you hear it, because he has perfected this very, very unique technique where he is able to interrupt himself.
Right.
And as Bill Hader says in one of his segments, he says that, he and his partner over there at Barry, they would just listen intently to try to figure out how he does it, and that at times it almost seems as if he's talking at the same time as his own self. It really does create something of a magic trick.
It is, and I wanted to ask you about that coming up soon. I want to ask you about there's some really big names in entertainment that are just huge fans of Phil Hendrie's. But the thing is, there are so many things happening on the show at once. It really almost seems impossible, for one thing, that any networks would agree to put this show on the air, because, for one thing, this is 3 hours, mostly improvised, I guess, and you talk about playing with live ammunition. He's upsetting people. He's having to think on the fly with these premises. He's got to manage angry callers. He's got to. It's insane, all the things he's doing at once. So, and we talk about that too. Where, honestly, one of the motivations for this was, I just like what you're just describing right now is. It just seems like, how is this doesn't fit in with the paradigm of radio? How is this? I don't understand how this is working, where you're duping some of the audience, and I can't imagine that the people in that industry were getting it, But and what I learned was, in many ways they weren't, but Phil didn't have amazing ratings. But he had amazing engagement. Oh, yeah.
So for those who don't know, and I'm sure you do, there's a couple of ways that things are quantified in radio, and one is just straight up ratings, how many people are listening, and then the other is how long are they listening. And for Phil, not surprisingly, it was off the charts, because
you couldn't tune out. You had to find out what was going to happen.
Yeah, and it's just hilarious. And then you would tune into his radio show like you would a TV show and listen to the end, So, I don't know. Is that what we were talking about?
Exactly.
I have to ask Patrick, speaking of duping, how long were you not in on the joke?
Oh, I think, because the first time I listened, I was, I had kind of gone through a whole segment, because when I interviewed people, sometimes people would only listen for 5 minutes or something, and they would leave just lost. I think I got turned on to him when I was taking long drives. So by the end, and for those who don't know, by the end of the segments with the particular guest, it's pretty crazy. They're like, it's becoming unbelievable towards the end. And that's when, so I think I was okay, after the second one, I remember saying, like many listeners, I said to a friend of mine, man, this show I'm listening to is like crazy. This is a crazy show. And they say, oh, that's Phil, man, and they told me. And that seems to be the story with a lot of people, that they relay what their experience was with a friend, and then that person says, "That's Phil Hendrie. You got to keep listening. It's amazing." And by the way, I mean, the guy was insanely prolific, and almost, I mean, they're not all, knock out of the park, but
Right.
it's close.
And
Yeah, I'm a backstage pass member, so Max, you've listened too. I mean, we've gone through it, and there's very few duds, I would call them. I mean,
And then not only that too, but the fact that not only is he a man of like improv, but he's also an impersonator, and even Art Bell actually kind of appreciated his imitations of him.
yeah. Tell us about the Art Bell segments are the classic, and he sounds just like him. I mean, and even down to the what's the announcer with the real deep voice that he would do, and then having the Dancing Queen music playing as the bumper and everything. But apparently Art Bell was a fan. So.
Yeah, I didn't include the Art Bell stuff, and there was a bunch of things that I didn't include just because I had to sort of weave the story the way I had to weave it. I mean, by the way, there was some really interesting. I'd like to say that, in my estimation, Phil Hendrie is an artist, and he's not like a regular radio person.
No.
So that was my sort of guiding light, or my North Star while I made the thing. But that did preclude me from including some things that were really amazing and kind of out there. I don't know if you'll find this interesting. It's not as funny as everything else, but I listened to one where he had Bobby Dooley on, and once again, for people who didn't know, Bobby Dooley is this outrageous sort of middle-aged woman who is inappropriate, and she has, she's very, very opinionated, and she's extremely annoying, but in a hilarious way. But I don't know if you ever heard this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly.
I've heard of Bobby Dooley. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he constantly does that. But did you ever hear the one where her son, she has a couple of kids, and her son Dylan dies, and he spent a whole segment speaking to Bobby Dooley, who is himself, about the death of her son, and there's not one joke in it.
Right.
I mean, that I don't. For me, anyway.
Wait, was it a joke? Did he say at the end, or did she say, "I'm just kidding"? Because all his characters did. Oh, really?
He died. I mean, the kid died, and then he took this comedy show that he has, this extremely successful, and just went the whole time, just consoling her.
Wow.
That almost kind of makes me think of like the comedic shift from like MASH, where it's like, oh, that's a comedy. Oh, wait, this can get serious
on a dime. You don't know when it.
Or it's Andy Kaufman,
Right.
Like sometimes he just said, no, I'm not going there. I'm not gonna do jokes tonight.
Right.
Now he didn't do that very. As far as I know, that was the only time he ever did it. But that was I say that story only to say that he served, his art, regardless of other, pressures or demands that might have been upon him, and I always respected that.
Well, I was wondering, okay, there's an episode, because I recently discovered this one, and I'm just like, you talked about engagement, and you're right. You don't just listen to 2 minutes of a Phil Hendrie segment. You have to hear the entire thing, because you don't know how it's going to unfold. You don't know what's going to happen. But there was one where he got on the air and there was no jokes. He was as serious as he could be. He said, the show has certain requirements. The studio, was David Hall, because David Hall was actually a real guy, I guess, that he worked for. But he's
in my film.
Yeah, he was supposed to provide this. He's going on for about 5 minutes about why he's unsatisfied with the situation of where he's working. He said, and so this is going to be my last broadcast. I'm leaving the air. Good night. And then he was getting ready to walk off, and he goes, okay, all right, the door's shut. And the door was stuck. And it turned into this long gag where he was trying to make this big dramatic exit from the show. And you're like, is he really quitting? But then within 20 minutes, there's like, Bud has got a chainsaw at the door, and they're trying, and he was really embarrassed because he couldn't make this big, exciting, walk off the show moment and everything. And I'm like, this guy is just a genius. And plus, that is some of the riskiest stuff I've ever heard of. Because, I mean, you have to keep advertisers happy. You got to keep your network happy, your sponsors. I mean, I don't know. In the trailer, it says juggling chainsaws. They're not kidding. That's what he did. So.
Yeah, and another interesting thing about all of that is that Phil was a guy that wanted to, like all of us, he wanted to succeed. And in the world of radio, as you know, succeeding means syndication.
Right.
But interestingly, that show, because it was so peculiar, it did get syndicated, but it didn't really work all that great in syndication because now you're dealing with, getting everybody up to speed and having all these different markets with all these different program directors and stuff trying to understand it and, maybe get behind it, and maybe some didn't.
Right.
And what ended up happening in that situation is Phil was sort of, disappointed with how this trajectory was going, because it was supposed to be, a house on the hill and, everything is awesome. And then it ended up being sort of something of an artistic disappointment for him. And that's also part of the story.
It's interesting too, because when you look at history, the perfect example for me is the movie It's a Wonderful Life, because apparently that was not a big box office success. It actually polarized some people. Some people had no interest in it at all, and it grows to become a classic. So you can't always, even the Charlie Brown Christmas is another one. The networks didn't even want to put that one out because they're like, this thing's cheaply drawn, it's jittery, why are we using kid actors, all this other stuff, and yet it's a classic. So the experts aren't always the experts, it seems to me.
Well, and certainly that is another element of this film, is that of all places for somebody to have their artistic talents, radio did not foster a person like Phil Hendrie.
Not at all. Yep.
And it was just strange that was one of the things that I always found fascinating, was that it was so fascinating to me to watch somebody truly stick to their artistic guns in a place where he was, I don't want to say he was unwanted, but kind of.
No, I think that's a correct word. So.
Another thing that kind of comes to mind with regards to the versatility of Phil Hendrie in his career, like how you said that radio couldn't necessarily sustain him. What intrigues me about him is the fact that he could even sustain himself in the realm of voice acting. For example, I remember hearing his work on shows such as Futurama, and he's still doing his shtick technically because he's playing two different characters at once in two different genders.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah. Well, he does a lot of voice acting. I know that. So, hey, I wanted to ask you something. I wanted to just let you, and please let Phil know as well. There is one thing about Phil Hendrie that even, so we've been doing Geek Tank close to 10 years out here. Max and I have always been interested in radio, and but one thing that struck me about Phil Hendrie was the whole, ever since the beginning, he was doing this backstage pass thing where you archive the shows and you can join the website and listen back to the shows, a big precursor to modern podcasting. And what struck me about his work is that it ages really well. It's not like there's some shows where they're talking about the news of the day, which I guess is great, but by a week later, you don't even care about the content. So it influenced me in the way we approach Geek Tank Radio to try to make content that is, if somebody were to listen 5 years from now, hopefully they find it interesting. Like, you don't want it too dated. And a lot of that goes back to just me being a fan of Phil Hendrie. So
I tell you, man, it's funny you're saying that, because that is something. I mean, first of all, of course, this documentary is about his radio life rather than what came after that, although I do touch on what came after it at the end. But of course, I had to immerse myself in what you're talking about, that archive, which is vast.
Yeah.
And I was, just swimming around in that. And, I'm a fan of comedy, besides all this, of course. And it's remarkable how, you'll watch even a movie or you'll listen to a comedy bit that you always found hilarious. I have to say, man, Phil is incredibly timeless in how that stuff works. I mean, it was really risque then, and it continues to be risque in many ways. And honestly, I don't know what makes something last and stay relevant. I'd have to sort of do a thesis on that, but whatever it is, he has definitely done it. You listen to this stuff, or even I was on a podcast yesterday with him, and he's just doing his thing, and it's still, some you listen to like Henny Youngman or whatever, you listen to older, and you go like, okay, that was probably funny, at some point, but Bill is just, just as funny and modern and everything as he ever was. It's fantastic.
I want to ask you, because in a second, of course, we want to steer into getting more, about the documentary, but just to kind of bookend this for you, because I'm giving you my perspective as a listener, and so I discovered him in 2002. I can't remember when they pulled him off the air, because I hate to say it, like you said, some of these networks they couldn't care less how funny he was. It was like
it was essentially 2006.
Yeah, so it was about 2006, and keep in mind, I'm, in fairness, I was raising kids, I was busy, and that was my focus, but
sure.
I rediscovered Phil. I'm always about 6 years behind when it comes to technology, I'll just tell you that. So I didn't have a smartphone until 2016, but when I did, I said, I wonder what Phil Hendrie is doing these days, and sure enough, I found that he still had the Backstage Pass going, and he had the daily podcast. So I rediscovered him then, and the day, I don't know how. I really just don't know. You talked about prolific. He comes up with new shows, basically about 5 shows a week, maybe 4. He'll run replays and stuff, but I don't know how you do that, man. The guy, and I've heard him say that if he's not creating, I don't know. I guess there's something. He can't handle it. He has to be doing what he's doing. Is that what you saw?
Yeah, he's got crazy energy, and but I don't think he said it in my investigation into all this, but it was said that maybe at a certain point it got to be a lot. That he was doing a 3 to 4 hour show, 5 days a week, as you said, and just churning out stuff that, it's not like talk, sports radio or something where you're just kind of like talking about the game and then just, spouting off and spewing about what you think and stuff. I mean, it requires a lot of, a certain amount of preparation and just a lot of, brain work, man. It was, when you think about some of the, I should say, some of these characters that he developed, he doesn't believe that they were necessarily social commentary, but I kind of do.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
He would just develop these characters that had depth, and you kind of, they were sort of exaggerated versions of people that we all know, and which to me sort of equals social commentary. And, with that, it would really go into some incredible places, sometimes spurred on by the callers or sometimes not. But, you would see these people that he would create and what they would do, and you couldn't sort of help but wonder, like, where's he going to take this? And that was, just made it all the more fascinating in my mind.
You kind of bait the hook there, Patrick. You really got me curious. In your opinion, what would you say is your favorite character that Phil Hendrie has created?
Well, I'm a little. I pause. I mean, the answer comes right into my head, but I feel weird about saying it.
Don't worry, my one's equally weird.
Yeah, I want all of us to voice our, because Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, it's Herb Sewell without that.
That's my favorite too.
That's Max's favorite. I didn't think he was anybody's favorite. I mean, he's great, but Herb Sewell, the guy's a criminal. He's a creep and a pervert. And
Great minds think alike.
Are you kidding me?
I know it's not something that I'm readily happy to admit, but those bits. I mean, I have a whole long segment. Oh man, I have a whole segment in there about Herb Sewell because to me that encapsulates just the nature of how where he'll go. Like that's a very difficult place for a comic to try and get laughs.
Okay, go ahead, Matt, because
He is not afraid to be irreverent with Herb Sewell. One of my favorite Herb Sewell segments has to be when he's talking about how people who are in a hurricane crisis situation need to get a laugh.
Well,
I like when he pushes his wife out of the car and he started bouncing down the road like a rubber ball.
Oh yeah, Max, that's go. You have a favorite line out of that?
It's like,
bit,
no one gives you a guidebook for parenting, and it wasn't me that did it. I was out of my mind when I did it.
Yeah. What he's like. Well, the kids have grown a little distant for me, and their mother passed away at a when they were young. Then later in the gag, you find out she passed away because he shoved her out of the car with them in the back seat. It's like he is just as evil. But now the best part of Herb Sewell has to be his little goofy laugh. Is that based on Orson Welles or who was that?
It's William F. Buckley.
Okay.
And someone else who I can't remember and I didn't think I know. But in the movie, it's so great, man, because Bill Hader, who, by the way, that's also one of his favorites.
You got to be kidding me.
And
I had no idea he was that popular.
He's doing Herb Sewell. I got him going. I would cut between Hader doing Herb Sewell on the radio, and then Phil doing Herb Sewell like live on the in the interview.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite spots because everybody's just doing Herb and it's to me it's just so funny, man. I think it's just the guy is just so out there that I can't not crack up.
I can't believe this because Max, that was what he was he was like, and I feel like sometimes Max is almost embarrassed to admit that he's his favorite character.
It's not necessarily embarrassed to admit it. You gotta walk on eggshells because I know these days he's not as prevalent on some of his modern contents.
Yeah. All right, well, here's my favorite. No, see, now I have to be honest. I almost feel like it's picking a favorite child because in a certain context, there's probably about 8 of them that are my favorite. But if somebody holds a gun to my head, I have to say Steve Bozell might be my favorite. And where he's always on the verge of he's this big, tough, manly guy, but he always sounds like he's ready to break down and cry, and he wants to sue everyone. And but I thought he told me that he was based on. What is it? Dick Vermeil, who was the coach of the Eagles, that he would break down and cry in the middle of like a Hall of Fame speech, or he's motivating the team. I think he said it was Dick Vermeil. Does that sound?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
But he doesn't say that, and he never told me that. So.
Well, I got one more quick question because we do got to shift to the documentary. Okay, we do, Geek Tank Radio here, and at any given time there could be 2 to 3 to 4 of us here talking. Well, if I say something to you, you talk, and then I can catch my breath, and Max can talk or whatever. But this is a fundamental question. I don't even know how Phil Hendrie can breathe, or if he has to breathe. Like, I almost feel like he must do breathing exercises like an opera singer or something, because he is talking the entire time and he's cutting off, one character is cutting off the other or something. Have you ever seen him like gasping for air or, I just wonder about that,
Yeah, I mean, I have seen him do it, and that is actually another one of those chapters where he talks about it. He's not really gasping for air, but he has definitely given that element of his act a lot of attention because he can cut himself off in places where only a person interrupting another person would do it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah. It's hard.
So,
I don't know. He cuts somebody off and then says, okay, and that was Steve Bozell. And so, yeah.
And then there's also
and it's always like it's mid-sentence, and sometimes it's like right in a passionate place where
Right.
all of a sudden two people are both passionate and they're cutting each other off. And there's just no way when you hear people speak that way, and in this case it's one person, but when you hear that it's more than one person, you're not at all doubting that it's more than one person. So that's what's so incredibly effective about the show, and it really it's really at the foundation of everything.
And when I've seen video of him doing it, what kind of lends authenticity to the Gambit is when he kind of puts his face at like different parts, like away from the microphone. Like he might be far away to sound like the general and like his chin's up or whatever, or Bud like he's like to the right of the mic or whatever. It's like that's just like a whole level of professionalism right there.
Yeah,
Well,
it
yeah,
looks
and a lot of
exhausting to
people
do
thought-
the show. I mean, he's moving
my
around
God.
constantly.
It had to be exhausting. And what's also kind of interesting about that is a lot of people assume that he had a device of some kind, that
A modulator or something.
yeah, or some button that he could press or something that he, tried to figure out. But it's really just a guy with an old phone. I mean, that's it.
Well, I wondered about that, and I wonder if he has like a supply of old phones, because that's literally what he's doing. He's got the handheld thing fed into the board. At least that's what it looks like from the YouTube videos, and which they don't make anymore, I don't think. So, and he's got to have it scratching just the right way, and I don't know, man. It's funny because the YouTube videos even. I don't know. You talk about theater of the mind. This is the ultimate theater of the mind. What he does, and I don't know. But okay, so Patrick, how did this project come to be? And it's just called Hendrie, right? Hendrie. For years, I called him Phil Henry. I mispronounced.
Yeah, I know. I used to when I first started listening. I thought it was Henry.
Yeah.
But I will say, if I can, just kind of go back to what you just said. I totally agree with you that it is the ultimate theater of the mind. It's in many ways, it's sort of like watching a movie inside your head, and for that reason, and I have to say, man, since we're moving towards the doc, I wanted to do a documentary on Phil Hendrie even before I knew how to make a documentary, and so years and years went by, and then I ended up finding somebody that knew more people than I knew and could get me access to some of these people that I know that Phil influenced and stuff. But I couldn't. So once I was up and rolling, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to make this documentary. This is happening. I suddenly realized, like, whoa, how am I going to? This is an audio medium, and
right.
Last time I checked, documentaries are visual, so I had no thought about that. I didn't think, well, how am I? So then, what can you do with that? So it took me. I mean, maybe this is embarrassing, but it took me months to try and figure out how to serve Phil's comedy, because I think the mistake that some documentarians make or filmmakers make is they compete with their subject. And in this case, what am I going to? I'm going to try to accompany Phil's bits with visual things that I think are funny. Am I going to animate people that look like what I think Bobby Dooley looks like?
Right.
Or I didn't want to do that strictly based on what you just said, which is this lovely theater of the mind that this man has created, So I ended up, I used, I don't know if you know who Don Hertzfeld is, but he's this great animator guy that actually uses stick men in this beautiful way.
Oh, I think I've seen his work, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So I chose that. I chose a stick man, who I called Arvin, and he's listening to Phil. So whenever the bits come on, Arvin is, doing dishes, or he's at the beach or something like that, and then the bits still remain theater of the mind.
I'm really glad you approach it that way, because one thing I will say that I've never been a fan of is I like, for example, my Bobby Dooley and my Steve Bozell are going to look different than Max's or your Steve. And I don't want anybody to influence that. I don't want somebody, I didn't think she had red hair, or I didn't, I just want, that's my Bobby Dooley right there. So
I know. I think Bobby Dooley's kind of sexy, but maybe not everybody thinks that.
See, her attitude makes her not that way, in my opinion. Yeah.
But I think like she's physically attractive.
Right. Mechanically, you could say but her personality rubs you the wrong way. But so you came up with this, and I got to be honest. You said Phil Hendrie went off the air in 2006. Seems like you're about 15 years too late on this one, but what made you do this now? I mean, I know he's still working. I'm trying to be provocative here, but it's like, what took so long?
Well, I mean, as we said earlier in this conversation, you may be right that it's 15 years too late, but if it didn't sort of stand the test of time, the material, I wouldn't have, but it did, and it's funny today. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, I listen every day. That's the first thing I listen to,
yeah.
Exactly. I've said what's on this morning's podcast. So, yep. Yeah.
So, I mean, the story with that is I used to listen. I used to drive here in California. I was a student at an art school, and then I used to come down to L.A. So I would listen to it all the time, and I remember thinking like, oh man, somebody should do a documentary on this guy. And then he ended up going off the air, and I like you, I lost track of him. But I've always thought about him, and a friend of mine I think had some tapes of his, and I found him on the internet some places, so I could still get my kind of fix a little bit. And then and it just always stayed in my mind, this idea. And then once he became less around or visible, I thought, well, maybe this is even better. This telling people about this guy that was around and kind of influenced people. I mean, everybody was into him, man. Like Gary Shandling was a fan of his. Judd Apatow. All kinds of
Bill Murray,
Collins.
Gary Oldman. I mean, a
Bill
lot
Murray,
of heavy hitters. Right. Yeah,
that's right. And so I was like, man, this would be kind of cool to just say to everybody, there was this guy who had made this amazing stuff, and he kind of came and went, and not that he's gone, he's still doing great stuff, but in terms of just a big radio personality. Howard Stern is another fan of his,
right?
And then I met this who was a great friend of mine. His name is Jordan Brady. He was a stand-up comic back in the day, and he worked alongside Judd and Wayne Fetterman and these kind of guys, and I had pitched it to him a couple of times, and he kind of just like didn't really listen. And then this last time, I said, "Look, man, I really think this would be an interesting idea." And this time he was listening, and so he helped me get access to some of these people. And honestly, man, once we started to go down the road, people really wanted to, like Henry Rollins was. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows who Henry Rollins is, but Henry Rollins is a punk icon and like sort of a shaman to a lot of people. And this guy loves Phil. Like he didn't want to leave the interview room. He was he just wanted to talk more and more about Phil.
I got the impression that that's what is going to happen in this documentary, because I feel like there's people just like us where it's like they can't wait to talk about him and they want to share their experience with it. So
yeah. And it's so interesting, man, like as you say, your experience with it. He's the only radio person that I know about where you can remember the first time you heard him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Listening to him is you actually have experiences, which is not normal in the world of radio.
Yeah.
And
it's more disposable,
And speaking from the perspective of someone who was introduced to him after the fact, I feel like your documentary also kind of serves to, quote unquote, re-educate a new generation to kind of rediscover the genius that is his work.
Oh yeah, you're going to reach a lot of young fans now. I hope so.
I hope so, man. And as I said, I tried to keep it his comedy. I tried to serve his comedy, and the idea behind this one, man, is that this film isn't necessarily a documentary about Phil, although it is, but it's also a comedy in itself. Using Phil's material. So I tried to, in terms of the cuts and stuff like that, I tried to always, because it's not easy to take something that is, usually his bits were like 15 minutes long,
right,
and then try to like get him, into this format. But I did my best to keep it funny, and I think to watch it is, you laugh, and that's what I was hoping to do, and that's what I hope people will do.
Well, and without too many spoilers, I'm amazed that there's a segment on Herb Sewell. That's hilarious. So what are we? I mean, I see the celebrity interviews. I'm sure we're going to be hearing from Phil. Are you going to show us his studio? Or are you going to show us like what it looks like when he's doing the show? And
yep, I got some of that in there. I mean, there's the idea I had right away was to, although I've interviewed him in a few different environments, but the crux of it is I rented a 1976 Eldorado convertible, and it just seeing Phil in that car is just perfect in my mind, And he talks while we drive around his neighborhood, and that's sort of what's the vein that kind of moves throughout the whole thing. And but it does go to where he's actually doing it in the studio. We do some of that, and then a lot of talking heads, and then these animations that where this character kind of he listens to Phil sort of in a deadpan way,
right?
So it doesn't really trigger where you're supposed to laugh or anything like that.
And it's March 15th is the release. So what services is it on? Because when people are listening to this, Patrick, let's just pull the curtain back. It's going to be after March 15th. So where can they watch this as soon as they turn off the show here?
Everywhere, I guess. Like it's on
streaming platforms. So yeah,
all of them. Yeah, it's iTunes, or I guess they call it Apple TV now. I guess Prime. All I think any platform where you get that kind of stuff, it's available. It's distributed by this company called Freestyle. They've been really cool, and they're out there promoting it. So
I can't wait, man.
I can read you the thing, or maybe I'll just send it to you.
Yeah, send me that. We can link it up with our when we post this episode and everything. So, man, Patrick, this is so cool. I never thought I'd see the day that we'd get the comprehensive documentary about Phil Hendrie. So, I mean, this is cool. And
man, I have to say, like now that it's done and out and stuff, that reaction is kind of common, and it really kind of warms my heart. Not for me, but just that people are so, happy that Phil is being recognized, and that certainly, kind of warms my heart,
I guess the thing is, he came along at the perfect time, because now that I'm thinking of it, I told you I didn't have a smartphone till 2016. Part of me kind of liked the world better before smartphones were around, if I'm being honest. And because the thing is, Phil Hendrie, in my opinion, he stands alone, and yet in the podcast sphere, he's one of probably 5 million other podcasts. So to find him takes some effort. And I mean, he'd still be the biggest audio show out there, in my opinion, if we didn't have this delivery method where there's so much other, noise out there, you could say. So I don't know.
Although he seems to be doing really well, between the podcast and the website, that has all the archives and stuff. I think he's doing good, man. And he also is, and this is in the movie too, is doing lots of stuff on camera. And he's actually, he's a great actor, and he's anything that requires improvisation and stuff. He gets gigs like that, and he still does voiceover work. And I mean, Phil is definitely as relevant as he ever was, and he's still busy and doing his thing. It's great.
Would you say that based on your research of him that he would he ever name quote unquote a successor, like someone who could match his talent or his ability, or do you think that his talent is best to die with him?
Yeah, I mean
that's morbid, Max, but you're right. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for him, but I can definitely speculate. I would say that he's just a singular kind of a guy. Like I talked to that was one of the questions that I asked a lot of the interviewees is isn't it fascinating that in many other places, people, like music, for instance, you do a certain thing and then people emulate you and then you become an influence because people have emulated what you've done or you've influenced these people. And with him, it's, very, very much respected, but nobody has sort of attempted it and ever done anything. I mean, I guess there's some things. I guess there's a guy on TV that does something kind of similar in a talk show format. I forget his name. But for the most part, he has done something that nobody has tried to do again.
Yeah, that's what's interesting.
And that's kind of amazing.
Yeah, I've thought the same thing. I'm like, why isn't some voice actor? I know, like Jess Harnell. We got to meet him once through our convention, and the guy literally can impersonate anybody. He got sued by Steve Perry for sounding too much like Steve Perry, that type of thing. But I still think there is something singular about Phil Hendrie. Like I'm not sure even Jess Harnell could do something like that. So I mean, it's the right attitude, it's the right sensibilities, it's the way he unfolds a story. He does, it keeps you, wanting more, but it also makes you're compelled to listen to every minute of the show. So it's a kind of genius that I don't know who else has that. So.
Yeah, and I'm always a little weird about using the genius word, but if it is to be used in the case of Phil, it would have to be, and to your point, it would have to be that he was really, really funny on at the highest percentage. In other words, if somebody were to try to say, "Oh, let me try to do this Phil Hendrie shtick," I don't know if they could,
No.
Like it's happening so quickly, and the stuff that he is coming up with on the fly at the speed that it's, going on, I don't know if there's that many people that could, physically pull it off.
No. The guy stands alone, man. And Patrick, I'm so glad you made this movie. I can't wait to watch this. And will you please tell Phil, here in Memphis, we just love the guy, and keep going strong. And I, like I said, I'm a Backstage Pass member. I listen every day, man. But,
man, I can't wait to tell him. I'm going to see him tomorrow, where he's doing like a Channel 2 news thing to promote it, which we're excited about. And I'll be sure to tell him about this conversation and about you guys, and I think it's awesome that you're into it, and I'm so glad people are.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We fun little thing. We interviewed Mo Collins here last year, and I know she's a big friend of his. So she loves Phil Hendrie too. We wound up talking about him in her interview, which was kind of interesting. But hey, so it's Hendrie, Hendrie. I always spell it because it's easy to sound like Hendrie. March 15th, everywhere on streaming. And Patrick, how do people follow you on social media? Because I have to say, I really appreciate that you interact with your fans pretty well.
Yeah, I mean my social media thing is pretty meager, but my Instagram is Pitrack, Pitrack. That was my childhood nickname, 11. And
well, no wonder nobody can find you, man.
I know that. I got this thing. Like, people were like, "You should get on Instagram." I'm like, "What is that? What's Instagram?"
Jeez,
but it's what it is now, and I'm stuck with it. So that's what's happening.
All right. Well, good luck with that, man. Okay, so Pit Rack on Instagram, folks. There you have it. I found you on Facebook much easier. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, hey, Patrick, this is great, man. Wish you all the success in the world, and I can please consider yourself a friend of the show. I hope we can talk to you again, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, please tell me what you think of it when you see it, and I can't thank you enough for having me on.
And thanks for the all the time. You're really generous with the time, and I can't believe you and Max are both the sickos who Herb Sewell is your okay. Anyway, all right, Max. You got a fellow, a comrade in that one. So, Patrick, we're going to let you go, man. But thanks again, and it was great talking to you here on Geek Tank Radio.
Thank you so much.